opening the center immediately, preparing for a swift pawn advance and potential queenside expansion. Embracing hypermodern ideas, black cedes central space initially to prepare a fianchettoed bishop's potent diagonal influence. Launching a central pawn thrust immediately challenges black's fianchetto setup for space. Developing the bishop to its long diagonal immediately pressures the center and prepares for castling into safety. Commanding the center, white seeks to restrict black's fianchettoed bishop's scope and prepare for an assault on the queenside. Solidifying the center and preparing kingside castling demonstrates a commitment to a robust pawn structure. Developing the knight to see 3 shores up the center and prepares for further queenside expansion, adding a piece to the central struggle. Embracing a dynamic central gambit, black immediately challenges white's ambitious pawn formation by sacrificing a pawn for active piece play and open lines. Developing the knight to e2 reinforces the center and prepares kingside castling without blocking the f-pawn. Developing the knight here solidifies the center and prepares for further piece activity. Opening the queenside pawns creates immediate central space, pushing black's pieces back and potentially isolating the knight. This retreat cleverly reinforces the central pawn chain's grip, while preparing to unleash the knight's attacking potential from a new square. Reinforcing the central pawn chain sacrifices immediate attacking potential for solid positional control. Unleashing a pawn storm, black aggressively challenges white's central space and aims to open lines for their pieces. Fortifying the center's pressure, white prepares to challenge black's advanced pawn chain and solidify control of key central squares. Exchanging the bishop there might relieve pressure on your kingside, but opens a diagonal for white's queen. Sacrificing the bishop opens a crucial diagonal for the queen and creates permanent weaknesses around black's king. Reclaiming the center with your knight now opens lines, but consider the king's safety as your own pawn shield weakens. This decision centralizes the queen, preparing to join the kingside attack and potentially exploit the open lines. Rerouting the knight to a less active square weakens black's kingside defense considerably. Solidifying kingside space while preparing a castle seems a prudent way to develop the pawn structure and secure the king. Securing the monarch is paramount. Initiating the castle frees the rook and bolsters the king's defense. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure, this maneuver prepares to contest the key central diagonal and potentially launch a kingside attack. Challenging white's central pawn chain, this move aims to open lines for black's pieces and create dynamic counterplay. Securing the king's safety now allows focus on preparing a queenside initiative or reinforcing the center. Breaking open the center now liberates the queen's bishop and prepares for pawn advances, but also opens lines for white's pieces. Opening the c-file now offers attacking potential, though it momentarily neglects kingside defense. Challenging the central pawn structure directly, this checks the king's safety and probes for immediate opportunities. Securing the king's retreat channel, a pragmatic step against black's queenside pressure. Black secures the dark-squared bishop, preparing to challenge white's central pawn structure and eyeing the queenside. Positioning the rook on the e-file shores up the center and prepares for potential pawn advances or tactical skirmishes. Consolidating the king's safety and preparing for a queenside expansion are the primary goals now. Unleashing the kingside pawn storm might be premature, potentially weakening your own king's defense while ignoring central control. Gaining a foothold on the e-file sets the stage for a potential counterattack, aiming to dismantle white's central pawn structure and open lines towards the king. Seeking to outflank on the queenside, white repositions the knight, hoping to eventually contest the c-file and improve its scope towards black's monarch. This pawn sacrifice finally breaks open the kingside, creating immediate tactical possibilities and challenging white's central grip. Opening the g-file offers attacking avenues for white's queen and rook, though it slightly weakens the king's shield. Opening the f-file, black gambits a pawn to disrupt white's pawn chain and activate the knight. Suddenly, the knight hops into a dominant central outpost, disrupting black's pawn structure and threatening lines towards the king. A bold attempt to destabilize white's center, potentially opening a diagonal for the dark-squared bishop, though it does expose the king slightly. Unlocking the queenside by creating a new outpost and aiming to pressure black's cramped king. Asserting the d-file with the rook initiates a critical pawn structure fight, potentially opening lines for aggressive pursuit. Opening a pathway for the rook, this bishop repositioning subtly challenges black's control over the c-file while preparing for potential pawn pushes. Unleashing a bolt of pure tactical energy, black exploits the momentarily exposed white king with a devastating check, disrupting white's planned fortress. Sacrificing a pawn to shatter black's king's shield reveals aggressive intentions, creating immediate tactical complexities across the board. Sacrificing the bishop to pry open the kingside's defenses promises a direct assault. Unleashing the knight to a centralized outpost, promising pressure on black's weakened kingside. Reactivating the central tension, this rook embarks on a daring infiltration, eyeing undefended pawns. A bold attempt to reclaim the initiative by pushing forward and challenging black's central control. Activating the rook on the open file creates pressure, forcing white to defend the d-pawn and consider their structural weaknesses. Securing the d-file offers a potential breakthrough, aiming to exploit the weakened kingside. Re-establishing queen pressure on the queen side, this maneuver threatens immediate discoveries and forces white to defend their king. Fortifying the queenside pawn structure aims to secure space, yet it surrenders the b-file's critical influence for white's rooks. Trading queens simplifies into an endgame where white's bishop pair might dominate, but black's active rook on the fourth rank poses immediate threats. Trading queens simplifies for white, aiming to exploit the open files and active rook. Relocating the rook to the seventh rank intensifies pressure along the open file, aiming to exploit white's slightly passive pawn structure. Repositioning the rook to the king's file aims to establish a battery against the black monarch. Initiating a bold counterattack, black aims to disrupt white's king's safety by activating the bishop. Pivoting the rook to the flank aims to contest the crucial open file and potentially initiate a queenside counterplay. Relocating the bishop opens diagonals for attack and offers fresh defensive possibilities on the queenside. Reopening the d-file offers a chance for white's rooks to become active passers. Reclaiming material, this exchange opens diagonals and forces a shift in white's pieces. Cracking open the king's shelter with a tempo-gaining pawn grab creates significant attacking potential on the kingside. A precarious pawn chain now fractures, opening lines toward your king. The king's shelter is dissolving, forcing a stark endgame evaluation. Exchanging the last central pawn opens the e-file for white's rook, creating immediate pressure on black's isolated king. The king's central placement now exposes him to potential dangers from the rook's advanced position. The king's exposed position now necessitates immediate defensive maneuvering. Consolidating the rook on the second rank is key, aiming to control open lines and exploit the weakened kingside. A bold king walk begins, aiming to disrupt white's remaining pawns and hunt for weaknesses. Securing the monarch's escape route, while the rook actively eyes the c-file. The rook invades the first rank, threatening to exploit the exposed king on the regal square. Forcing a king retreat opens up the diagonal, potentially trapping the isolated pawn. The king's path to safety now requires careful navigation through the open files. Asserting control of the open file, this advance pressures black's king, aiming to exploit the exposed monarch. Seeking refuge for the king, this maneuver aims to untangle the pieces and escape the relentless pressure on the kingside. The rook on h6 offers a crucial defensive screen, bolstering the king's safety against any checks from the black rook. Reclaiming the central pawn is a logical step, aiming to consolidate the rook's position and resist white's pressure. Snatching the pawn clears a path to the black king, initiating a decisive endgame attack. This endgame presents a stark material imbalance, and black's king now finds itself exposed to constant threats. Shifting the monarch towards the center aims to consolidate in the impending pawn endgame. Asserting control over the queenside flank with the rook, this pawn push forces a decision regarding the misplaced black king. Probing the kingside with this pawn advance aims to secure your monarch while potentially opening lines for future attacks. Expanding the queenside foothold adds pressure and potential space for black's king to maneuver. Pushing the king forward aims to secure the outpost on the 5th rank. Seizing the open file with the rook, but the king's exposed position now becomes a paramount concern. Activating the king in the endgame is a crucial initiative to both support passed pawns and threaten the opponent's remaining pieces. Securing the queenside pawn advance signals an intent to create counterplay and challenge white's space advantage. Gaining space on the kingside is now the priority, aiming to create passed pawns. A pawn advance here opens escape routes and offers kingside defense. Seizing the open file offers counterplay and a chance to disrupt black's otherwise solid pawn structure. Unleashing the king's potential into the open board, aiming to disrupt white's pawn structure. Unleashing the passed pawn, aiming to create a decisive threat along the kingside flank. Initiating a pawn storm on the queenside offers a desperate chance to create counterplay. The rook's advance aims to exploit the open file and create immediate pressure on the queenside, potentially forcing a pawn sacrifice. Attempting a desperate pawn grab, but white's rook is too active on the open file. Advancing the passed pawn from g6 to g7 now creates a decisive endgame advantage. A surprising foray into the enemy camp, hoping to disrupt white's attacking pawns with aggressive kingside infiltration. Unleashing the king's latent energy to exploit the overextended black pawn structure offers immediate attacking potential. Initiating the pawn storm on the queenside opens a dynamic avenue towards the opponent's exposed monarch. Unleashing a pawn's final sprint toward queenhood, this aggressive advance demands black's immediate attention to prevent a game-ending promotion. The king's exposed position now allows for a devastating follow-up with the rook on the open file. Promoting to a queen injects decisive attacking power, swiftly overwhelming black's defenses. The endgame is now fully simplified, with the white king actively hunting the pawns. Transforming the remaining rook into a queen marks the decisive moment in this pawn-heavy struggle, sealing the victory.